Pentagon takes over G20. We push for Middle East peace and World Federation. Now that a peace deal has been reached in principle in the Korean Peninsula, the US military, which just took over presidency of the G20, is going to push for a real Middle East peace deal, Pentagon sources say. Peace is also breaking out in other trouble spots like the Ukraine and the India-Pakistan border. All this is happening as the US and China call a truce in their trade war and start negotiations to form what is, as the Chinese government puts it, a new model for global cooperation. The dialogue must be conducted on the basis of equality and mutual respect. Legitimate concerns on both sides must be addressed, is how the official Chinese Xinhua news site described the situation. The negotiations will include discussions on setting up a future planning agency to work in harmony with the multi-trillion-dollar Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, say sources in the British royal family. The other big event last week was the deal reached between the British and Russians over how a post-EU-Euro will be run. British and Russian sources agree. This deal was reflected by the official return of Russia to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe (PACE). This group of 47 democracy is older and bigger than the 28-nation EU and includes major players like Turkey and Russia. Also, since Russia was kicked out for annexing the Crimean Peninsula, this means a de facto recognition of the split-up of the Ukraine. The fact that German Chancellor Angela Merkel was seen shaking mysteriously twice in the public makes us wonder if she was not hit with some sort of electromagnetic weapon in order to force her to give up on the German-dominated EU. What is certain is that Germany went along with the readmission of Russia into PACE. It will also probably agree to a no-deal Brexit. Pentagon sources also say a financial black swan event is being engineered to put an end to the fiat-based financial system and replace it with a quantum financial system, QFS, backed by a basket of real-world goods. Trade wars, problems with Deutsche Bank, a no-deal Brexit, and Iran tensions are meant to cause a stock market crash and anti-fiat currency to launch the QFS, the sources said. You do not need to have a Pentagon insider source to realize that the current system is mathematic doom. For one thing, the amount of money traded daily on financial system computers is literally thousands of times greater than the underlying real-world assets they are supposed to be based on. Right now, 80% of stock trading is done by computer programs, meaning AI is already controlling most of the future decision-making processes of listed companies. This has real-world effects. First of all, it's creating an asset inflation bubble of the sort that led to Japanese commercial real estate prices falling by 95% in value after their bubble burst. US pension funds, for example, assume their investment will have a year-on-year return of 7.15%. However, even if the stock market increases in value by more than that percentage every year, the real economy is only growing at the most by 2%. Since stock prices are not reflecting the underlying reality, this will mean that all pension funds are going bankrupt in the real world and people will suffer poverty in old age if the current system continues. Asset inflation also means that in the US, for example, 74% of people cannot afford to buy a house. The trigger for a new Lehman-style shock this time is likely to be a $3 trillion financial garbage heap called collateralized loan obligations, according to the BIS, the central bank of the central banks. What is good for today need not necessarily be good for tomorrow. More fundamentally, monetary policy cannot be the engine of growth, the BIS admits in its latest report. In other words, even the BIS realized that something like a reality-based, meritocratically run future planning agency would do a better job of managing the economy than using IAs to distribute fiat money and create financial bubbles. The admission of failure by the financial oligarchs is, of course, why there is so much frantic real-world horse trading going on these days. The biggest real-world commodity remains oil, and here is where the United States still has its strongest cards. This tweet by US President Donald Trump puts it nicely. China gets 91% of its oil from Strait, Japan 62%, and many other countries likewise. So why are we protecting the shipping lanes for other countries many years for zero compensation? All of these countries should be protecting their own ships. Pentagon sources say this tweet has already caused China, Japan, and India to send submarines to patrol the Persian Gulf and hunt Israeli submarines. Of course, it was the Pentagon that was behind the tweet, with Mark Esper as Secretary of Defense and Mark Milley as Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. It appears the Army now runs the Pentagon after the Marines had their turn with General Jim Mattis and John Kelly, the Pentagon sources note. This means the Marines have established a secure beachhead against the Khazarian mafia, and now the Army is taking over more mundane but important administrative tasks. As we mentioned near the top of this article, the US military now has leadership of the G20. That's because the Saudi American colony has taken over leadership of the G20 from Japan. This means the US military will coordinate the agenda via their script reading fake Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman (MBS). The Pentagon, of course, is furious at having been manipulated by radical Zionists into invading Iraq and is determined not to be manipulated into fighting a war with Iran. The Pentagon sources note that at the G20, there was no coalition against Iran, but India cancelled a $500 million deal to buy anti-tank missiles from Israel. The fact that Trump was positioned between MBS and Turkish President Recep Erdogan at the G20 group photo was meant to show that Turkey, together with Saudi Arabia, were going to work together for peace in the region over the coming year, the Pentagon sources say. Russia will work with Turkey, Egypt, Saudi America, and Iran to force the Israeli to accept real peace, Russian FSB sources say. Last week, Israel was given a warning when its GPS system were made dysfunctional by the Russians, rendering most of their weapon systems useless. The people of Israel are also finally starting to wake up. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak announced his return to politics last week, saying, "This is not time to be on the fence." Netanyahu's regime, with its radical messianic zealots and its corrupt leadership, must be toppled. Since Barak used to be Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's military commander, he knows from personal experience what a dangerous zealot the man is. By referring to radical messianic zealots, he was confirming what this writer has long asserted, which is that Israel is run by fanatics trying to start an artificial Armageddon. Getting back to Asia, Chinese sources are saying the reunification of the Korean peninsula will start with moves to deepen economic relations by linking railroads and roads, opening the Kaesong industrial complex, and allowing South Korean tourists to visit the north, among the things. Also, in Indonesia, President Joko Widodo was officially confirmed as winner of that country's election by securing 55.5% of total vote, ending Khazarian attempt to seize that country's gold. As the Red Dragon ambassador famously predicted, 555 will beat 666. Of course, just because the Satanists are losing does not mean the war is by any means over. The news from Italy of a mayor, doctors, and social workers selling children to sexual predators is just the tip of the iceberg. In the US alone, more than 40,000 children are disappearing each year. These people, concentrated at the top of the Western power structure, are literally fighting for their lives. They know what will happen to them if the public at large finds out what they have been doing to their children. They will also fight hard to protect the system of debt slavery. Last week, for example, newly elected Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev announced that instead of bailing out banks, he was going to write off people's debt. It was unlikely a coincidence that major explosions destroyed a military base there around the time of the announcement. Imagine how they would react to a worldwide jubilee. The battle against high-tech oligarchs running Google, Facebook, etc. will also be very tough. To help win this one, a bounty will soon be announced on the heads of the major high-tech shareholders and top management, secret society sources say. This is because legal actions by individual governments will not be enough to bring these transnational criminal enterprises to heel. They must be stopped from distorting the truth and replacing it with a fake IA-controlled reality.